The broken streetlight. Inspired by John chapter 8 verse 12, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. On the corner of 51st and Maplewood, a single streetlight had been out for months. At first, no one thought much of it, but as the nights grew longer, the block seemed to grow darker in more ways than one. Shadows stretched across the sidewalk, and people grew uneasy walking home. Teenagers gathered in the dimness, sometimes getting into trouble. Neighbors whispered about fights breaking out, cars being broken into, and how the city still hadn't fixed the light despite repeated calls. It felt as if the darkness was swallowing the block. But Pastor Harris, who lived down the street, decided he wouldn't let the darkness win. One evening, he brought a few folding chairs to the very spot where the streetlight stood broken. He invited neighbors to join him, not to protest, not to complain, but to pray. At first, only a handful came. They sang quietly, read scripture, and prayed for safety, for their children, for God's presence to cover their block. A week later, more people showed up, some curious, some desperate for hope. One woman read John chapter 8 verse 12 aloud. I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Those words began to sink in. Maybe the city hadn't fixed the bulb, but God was reminding them that His light never goes out. Soon, children began playing near the prayer group because it felt safer. A few young men who once loitered in the shadows started sitting in on the prayers. One even asked for help finding work. Slowly, the block began to change, not because the city flipped a switch, but because God's people decided to shine His light where it was needed most. 2 months later, the city finally replaced the bulb. When the streetlight flickered on, neighbors cheered. But by then, something greater had already happened. They had learned that true light isn't dependent on electricity or city workers, it comes from Christ shining through His people. That night, Pastor Harris looked around at the smiling faces and whispered to himself, Lord, thank you. Even in the darkest places, your light cannot be broken. And for the first time in a long while, the corner of 51st and Maplewood wasn't just lit by a lamp overhead, it was glowing with the light of lives transformed.